make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
So first of all, I'm not going to challenge any church teaching here, but so what I say, you might be surprised at how open it is. Simply being gay, simply being LGBTQ is not a sin, right? I mean, people are born that way. And there's nowhere even in the catechism that talks about that. Now, the church is against, for a number of reasons, same-sex marriage and those kinds of things. But I think, what we have to look at first is, how these people are beloved children of God.
Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners. And if you are viewing this on our YouTube channel, you don't see our guest this week. You will just see a little avatar, a little picture. But I can guarantee you that behind the avatar, there is a person.
He's real, I promise.
I am your political host, Will Wright. I'm joined with your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well. How are you, Will?
Doing wonderful. And our guest this week is Father James Martin. He is a Jesuit priest, editor-at-large of America Magazine, best-selling author of Jesus, A Pilgrimage, The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything, and Between Heaven and Mirth. In 2017, Pope Francis appointed him to be a consultor for the Vatican Secretariat for Communication. Father Martin's outreach to the LGBT community is also a subject of his book, Building a Bridge, How the Catholic Church and the LGBT Community Can Enter into a Relationship of Respect, Compassion, and Sensitivity, which was also turned into a documentary film from executive producer Martin Scorsese, which I highly recommend. I saw the documentary, didn't read the book, but I will read the book. And we are just delighted to have Father Martin here with us today. So welcome.
Thanks very much. And I should explain why it's just my avatar on YouTube. I'm recording from my bedroom, and for propriety's sake, people generally don't like to see, a Jesuit priest in his bedroom. But I'm happy to be with you.
Thank you. So,
I record all the time in my bedroom. I'm wondering if I should stop because I'm a pastor, Well,
it's very funny you should say that. I most people don't, it doesn't bother anybody. And there's obviously no one in my bedroom except me, but it really does bother
and the Holy Spirit.
And the Holy Spirit, right? It was everywhere. And, but it really does bother a lot of people. And so I just, I opt when possible.
Makes sense, man.
If it's going to turn some people off. So anyway, yes, the Holy Spirit is definitely
here. I guess you
here.
should stop recording with my shirt off.
Good idea.
All right. I'll take that.
Yes, we will have to remove that non-explicit rating that we have on our podcast. So I guess just to kind of level set, because we've got a lot of questions just about the Catholic faith in general, maybe just some pop culture stuff.
Sure.
Talk about your book and the documentary, but for somebody coming into this new that has never met a Jesuit priest, what are the titles, that priest or, people in your position, often use?
You mean like father and stuff like that? Yeah. It's interesting. I find that Protestants generally use, and Josh and you guys can call me Jim. I mean, Josh will mirror this. It's usually pastor. In the Catholic Church, people usually, when they're talking to you, it's like father so-and-so. Reverend is also part of my title. I mean, you can call me Jim, you can call me Father Jim. I don't really stand on protocol too much.
I can kind of tell that about you, and that's what makes me like you, Jim.
Well, actually, also it makes some people not like me because I've seen on social media like, call me Jim. What is that? And I want to say, well, that's my name. And I had a guy a good friend of mine who works with me. I'll tell you the story at America Media, and we're peers, right? I mean, he's an editor like me, and he's a layman. He's married, and when he started, he kept calling me Father Jim. Now his name is Kevin, and I said, just call me Jim. We're peers. I can't. I've been raised Catholic. And I said, well, I'm going to start calling you Mr. Kevin. And I did that until he stopped.
That's awesome. So I actually go to a spiritual advisor who's a Jesuit priest.
Who is it?
His name is, I wonder if I should say it on the podcast.
Maybe you shouldn't, but anyway.
Well, I need to get his permission. I'll ask you afterwards, but I'm actually curious if you know him.
Where do you live? Am I allowed
in
to ask that?
Richmond, Virginia. Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
we
I
see
know.
that all the time.
I think I know who it is. So yeah.
Yeah, he's awesome, and I call him Father.
Yeah. And, look, the other thing is
Yeah.
I don't prevent people from doing that if they feel comfortable. Like, I'm not going to say, but in this case, when the guy I was working with, I said, you can't call me Father for the next, 20 years. But anyway, so Father or Reverend or Jim is fine. As they say,
awesome.
just don't call me late for dinner.
So like your one of the other titles that are ascribed to you as Jesuit priest. So like what is a Jesuit priest?
Yeah, now that's a little more difficult. Even Catholics don't get this. All right, so in the Catholic Church, there are, as we know, priests and sisters and brothers. Okay. So some priests are what we call diocesan priests, which is the ones that most people are familiar with. That is, they're in parishes. They're under a bishop, right? And, if they move up in the sort of hierarchy, they go from priest to bishop to cardinal, right? So, but there are also what are called religious orders. Now, the ones that people know the most would be like the Franciscans. They live in community. They take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. The Jesuits are like that. We're a religious order. We were founded in 1540. And in that order are priests. Some of us are ordained, right? In fact, most of us are. And so we are religious order priests. Now, Pope Francis is a Jesuit, which now the thing that gets even more complicated, which is really it really does confuse people, is that we're all priests. We're all part of the Catholic Church. We're all under the Pope. From time to time, the Pope can ask a Jesuit priest who's in a religious order to become a bishop. Yeah, and like in places where there's, as we call them, mission territories, where there aren't a lot of local clergy. And so they become bishops. And now we have a Jesuit who's a pope, which has never happened. And, for years, people would say, well, no, you can't be a Jesuit and a pope because it would just never happen. And I remember after he was elected, people were like, hey, wait a minute. I thought you told us. So it's quite complicated, but it's basically I'm a priest within a religious order, and it's called the Jesuits' formal title, Society of Jesus. So that's my précis on that.
That's awesome. So just so I understand, so it's kind of like the Catholic Church, for lack of a better term, and I'm not trying to be offensive here.
No,
but
not
it's
at
kind
all.
of like the army in the sense that you have rank. Right?
That's
clear
right.
Rank, clear hierarchy. The Pope, he's like the commander in chief, right?
That's right.
And then you have cardinals that would be like generals.
That's correct. And you would
then
have like,
what's next?
well, beneath that cardinal is kind of an honorary title, but beneath that would be archbishop, bishop, priest, things like that in terms of hierarchy. But you're absolutely right. And then within, that's a really good, actually, I've never thought of that analogy. It's a great one. Within the military, you have the Marines, you have the Navy, you have Army. And, like maybe like you have like the SEALs.
Yeah, right.
You have like the SEALs. And within
So
the
you're
SEALs,
like the Navy SEALs of the Catholics.
well, they do call us the Pope's Marines. Pretty funny. But actually the SEALs, I don't mean in terms of that we're so elite, but the idea would be you're a SEAL and you're like a colonel or a major or something. You're still a major, but you're kind of in the SEALs and you're still in the military. Do you know what I mean? So,
right.
And maybe a SEAL, that's actually a great analogy. Maybe a SEAL could be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So that's how it's kind of. So that's what's happened to the Pope. That's actually a great analogy. That's what's happened to the Pope.
Well, you can have that for free. You don't
I
even
will
have
steal
to
it.
credit it.
I'll steal it and credit it. Absolutely.
And so we have the regular priests, and they're like the privates, dude. They're like the ones who are like, and then you have what, a bishop? So it goes.
So yeah. So what happens is in the diocese. So let's take Richmond. I mean, Richmond's a diocese. So so Richmond. You're a priest. You study in the seminary somewhere, and then you are assigned in your diocese. It's usually guys from that area. Like, I want to be a priest. I joined the seminary, and then they're like, okay, you're ordained. Now you take this parish, okay, and then you work your way up, and you're usually a pastor. Now, in our situation, pastor is the head of the parish. There might be 2 or 3 priests. Then, the Pope might say, now we want you to be bishop. So, bishop of the Diocese of Richmond. Okay. And then maybe you go to like Washington or somewhere bigger. And then, now this is not really a rank thing. This is just more of an honor. Then the Pope might say, you know what? I want you to be a cardinal. And that's like one of my advisors. You will vote for the Pope. And you will, and usually that's where the Pope comes from. So the cardinal thing is more like an honor. It doesn't really have kind of a hierarchy. So anyway, it is kind of complicated. And it, I mean, we've been around for 2,000 years, so it's not surprising it's complicated.
No, it's not. I was going to say how does it feel being part of like an organization that's literally like 600 years old or something like that?
Yeah,
literally.
It is.
That's awesome.
It is. Although it's funny when you talk to people who are in older religious orders, they'll usually tease you. They'll be like, "Oh, you're like 15. You were in 1540. Yeah, we were founded like the Franciscans. We were founded in like 1200." But it's like being. I mean, the important thing is that we're in the church. I mean, that's the important thing. The 2,000-year-old organization.
Oh,
now,
man.
Josh, what is your denomination? I'm curious.
We're actually non-denominational, but I grew up as Assemblies of God, so crazy Pentecostals, tongue speaking. But although I know quite a few Catholics who have spoken in tongues and kind of a charismatic, revival and renewal that swept through the Catholic Church. And what was that like for you?
That's a great question. So that was, the charismatic Catholic renewal after the Second Vatican Council in the 60s, mainly in the 60s and 70s. I think it was a kind of recognition. And I believe, the Holy Spirit, had different gifts for different people. And I think,
absolutely.
and I think it was it was a movement that went through the Catholic Church. I didn't really participate in it, not because I was against it, but just because my sort of, white bread, bland, suburban Catholic Church, which I love very much growing up outside of Philadelphia, didn't really talk about that. And, I've met some people, who have that gift, and it's really astonishing. And so I always say to people are kind of suspicious. I say, well, St. Paul talks about it. So, I mean, look, I don't know how the Holy Spirit works, but I don't have any personal experience, with that kind of gift.
Now, so
That's cool.
Probably one of the, second most famous Catholics in the country, if not the world, is our current president. And I'm curious, we don't have to get into the politics or anything that, but just having a president that seems like a devout Catholic, and to be honest, I don't even know what I mean by saying devout Catholic. But like he attends church every Sunday or
he
something.
does.
But I'm curious on like what does that mean for you? What does that mean for the church? To kind of have like your faith on kind of display, so to speak.
It's interesting. It's a two-edged sword, I think. He is devout. He goes to, now, not every Catholic would say that because of some of his political positions, but he goes to mass every Sunday. Faith is a big part of his life. When he speaks about it very articulately. Like a lot of our presidents, they have real, I think you can tell when they have the language, they have the experience, and, lots of different presidents from, different, both parties. When they open their mouth and they start talking about it, you say, all right, this guy kind of has this experience. So we're very proud of him. I think that, he's only our second Catholic president. But I knew that, as soon as he took office, that would mean that I think everyone in the Catholic Church in the United States would put him under a microscope about everything he said and everything he did. So I think, and I know I have friends, I don't know him personally, but I have friends who know him, and he is a devout person, and this is a very important part of his life. I sometimes feel sad for people who are religious folks in politics because their personal political stuff just gets ripped apart and misunderstood. And I think about one of my heroes, Jimmy Carter, who in that famous Playboy interview, maybe before your times, talked about, I've looked on a woman with lust in my heart, which is, he's basically using gospel imagery and using New Testament terminology, which doesn't often translate into the secular world. And people jumped all over him for that, So that I do feel sorry for people who, when they open their mouth and they say something that is really sincere to them, they get kind of pilloried sometimes, and it's kind of sad, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely really sad.
Well, it's like pearls before swine, right? I mean, says Jesus, right? I mean, you have something that's really
absolutely
meaningful to you, and then people, they trample all over it, just like Jesus said.
Yeah, I mean, there's been I agree with you, and what's interesting to me. So I was at a retreat, and it was at the you probably know of it. something on the Potomac. It's like a beautiful place.
Loyola on the Potomac in, in Faulkner, Maryland.
Yes.
Yeah, that's gorgeous with the bald eagles. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's a great
man.
place.
It was amazing. So I was there.
It's great.
They let me come do a retreat. It was so nice. Yeah, and I was just kind of awestruck by like walking around, but I was with one of the his father Peter, I think it was his name, and I was talking with him, and I was listening. I would go to mass, and of course I'm not Catholic, so I wouldn't participate in the
Eucharist.
Yeah, the Eucharist. Sorry,
it's okay,
and we can talk more about that.
Yeah, sure.
But he was talking. He was like, "Yeah, when I had Justice Gorsuch in my geometry class,
exactly.
And then like Kavanaugh and I'm like, what?
Yeah,
I'm like, so like, and he was just saying it like it was nothing, and then he was like, and he was here's what was so interesting, and I'd like to get your input on this. He basically said, I was there essentially when they were about to overturn Roe v. Wade. Like it was very close to that. And he was like talking very openly about we need it overturned. We want it overturned. Like this should be what's happening. And just right there in the mass. And I was interested. So like the Catholic Church and politics, like it doesn't seem to be necessarily the same kind of like, hey, we should separate, church and state, which I think people take that way too. Like, I don't think people really understand what that means often and jump to things. But how has it been in your experience, like the mix of politics and the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church's advocacy?
Well, it's usually
for certain political positions.
Yeah, it's usually very volatile. And I think that here's how I look at it. And again, and we talked about this before we went on the air. I am not this political junkie. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a political scientist, so I don't know the ins and outs. But the Catholic Church has certain positions, on life, on poverty, on love, on forgiveness, on all sorts of moral questions that it teaches, right? And that it has a right to teach. I do think, though, that and so if some of these teachings come off as political, so be it. So if I stand up in the pulpit, or I read an article saying Jesus Christ asks us to welcome the stranger, and people say, oh, you're being political. No, we're actually not being political. We're just talking about the gospel. If I say, I am for the sanctity of life, something like that's, part of my Catholic belief. I do think there is a line, though. And I do think, I believe that we should not be, for example, endorsing candidates. If you don't vote for this candidate, you'll go to hell. So I tend to leave out specifics when I preach, because one of the problems is you tend to divide your congregation. So if you say something that is, I endorse whatever, I endorse Donald Trump, or I endorse Joe Biden, or you're going to go to hell if you don't vote for Joe Biden because because Donald Trump supports immigration, blah blah blah, and in this way, or doesn't support it. And if you vote for Biden, you're going to go to hell because he supports abortion. What happens is you end up splitting your congregation, which I don't think is good. Pope Francis, I think one of the most helpful things I've ever heard is Pope Francis has said, we are meant to form consciences, not to replace them. So I think for me, the line is really pretty clear. I don't endorse. I don't say this person's going to hell. I don't say vote for this. But I think in general, it's important to stand up for beliefs. So for me, I also tend not to use names. If that makes sense. Right. Republican, totally. Democrat, Trump, Biden, Obama, Clinton. I just to keep it out of it.
Makes sense. So, yeah. That is really cool. And since you brought up the Pope, in the Vatican News recently, they mentioned that you received a letter from the Pope recently. So I've got some questions about that. But before I ask you, when the Pope sends you a letter, is this like an actual letter, like ink, paper, stamp, or is this like an email?
Is it ex cathedra? Is it like, hey, you have to do this, or you're?
Now the question is, what level? This is like a real inside baseball question, but ex cathedra. is it teaching? Is it an official teaching? And there's levels of teaching, which I always explain to people like this. If the Pope sends out an encyclical, a letter saying whatever, that Faithful Politics is the greatest show in the world and you must listen to it. All Catholics must listen to it.
Do you think he'll listen to this one?
That's right. Now, that would be a high level of teaching, right? Meaning it's an encyclical. He's sending it out to the whole world, blah, blah, blah. If he says it in an interview, little less of a teaching. If your parish priest says, if you listen to Faithful Politics, you're going to go to hell, little like lower level of teaching. So there are levels of teaching. A letter is not a high level, but, he is saying something. But to answer your question, generally speaking, I've actually not talked about this before. Generally speaking, when he writes to me, his secretary sends me a PDF of the letter that he handwrites. And if it's formal, this is really inside baseball. If it's formal and meant for public consumption, it will be typed out on letterhead. That's kind of how you know. And that's taken me years to figure out, because once he sent me a letter and I was like, wait a minute, is this for me? Is this for everybody? And I ended up having to ask his office. But it is, and sometimes I will get them in the mail. I mean, later on, sometimes they will send them.
Right.
It's an honor, always an honor.
Of course.
And
that's amazing.
Blows me
Can we
away
get him
still.
on? Can we get him on the podcast? You think?
Good luck.
Does he do podcasts?
He does. Well, he does interviews. He's done. He does interviews. He did an interview with our magazine America Media a while ago. He does more and more, and I think it's difficult for some people because he tends to also, as you know, he kind of tends to talk off the cuff. And so to your question, Josh, if he says, I have to tell you this funny story. This is a really funny story, and it is not one that was repeated, but it's not going to hurt him. So when we interviewed him at our magazine, one of our editors said, this is so funny, and there's a picture of her doubled over laughing. And I said to this editor, what was he saying that was so funny? And she said to him, my kids, she has 3 kids, have said to ask the Pope, what do you like better, dogs or cats? And you know what the Pope said? The Pope said, I'm not answering that, because if I say cats, the headline for the next week will be Pope hates dogs. So that's the thing. He speaks off the cuff, and sometimes, it gets him into trouble.
That's so funny. So I guess, what was the letter? And what did it say?
Yeah, more inside baseball. So there was an interview with the Associated Press where Pope Francis came out against the criminalization of homosexuality, meaning, as you know, in many places it's illegal and you can be jailed and some places killed. So it was a great step forward. In that interview, he was imagining a conversation, and you could hear him. He kind of changes his voice. He says, oh, being gay is a sin. But no, there are many sins. He was kind of imagining a sort of hypothetical conversation. Well, the headline said, being gay is not a crime, says Pope Francis, but being gay is a sin, which the Catholic Church does not teach. Simply being LGBT is not a sin. And so I wrote to him and said, and that was getting picked up everywhere. And I wrote to him and said, Holy Father, I think this is being misinterpreted. So what did you mean to say? And he wrote me back and he said, no, basically what I was just repeating what the Catholic Church teaches, that any sexual activity outside of marriage is sinful, but there are lots of things that mitigate that, right? Different circumstances. And so it was a really pastoral response. And my sense, I don't want to speak for him, was that he was happy to kind of clarify that. So that's the problem with a lot of these interviews, because he's imagining a conversation, he's imagining what someone would say, and then people don't get it. That was what the letter said.
Dude, if I had people looking at every single word I said and scrutinizing it, I would be in real big trouble.
Yeah. Well, they do that to me, and it is a kind of a pain in the neck. And it's just, it's crazy. And people, they don't give you the benefit of the doubt, So anyway.
Yeah. It's really sad. Like most people want to be judged by their intent, not their actions. Right. Yet they tend to judge other people by their actions, not their intent.
Absolutely right. That's completely right. And sad.
Yeah, and sad. But kind of relatedly, you've done a lot of work kind of in the LGBT community, more outreach. And I mean, number one, I think it's great. Like I watched your documentary, read tons of articles. I think that what you're doing, at least for the the broader kingdom is awesome, and it really speaks to my heart. I mean, so like I'm a believer. I'm the liberal of the duo. So Josh is a conservative. I'm the liberal. and
so what he's saying is I'm like the true believer, and he's like the kind of like 3/4 believer.
That's right. Now, Will, do you identify yourself as in a denomination, like a particular Christian or religious?
Christian? I mean, like I actually attend Josh's church.
Oh, okay.
So
that's non-denominational. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
but
John,
who knows? We might become Catholic after this interview.
We'd love to have you. Love to have you.
Yeah, I heard you guys use real wine, like for.
Well, we certainly do.
I'm all about that, dude.
Well, we do, and sometimes if you're the priest and there's lots left over, and you have to, as we say, consume it. It does. Like sometimes I have a very low tolerance,
sure.
And I'll be like a little buzzed before lunch. It is pretty funny. Like I had to drink a whole cup once, and I was like, if you were at a restaurant and you drank an entire glass right down. Anyway,
yeah, dude.
It's
that's amazing.
Does go to your head. So, Will, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
That's fine. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about sort of the Building a Bridge book, documentary. Kind of what was the basis for it, and I really like for our audience to just kind of hear that story because I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, sure. So at the Pulse nightclub massacre in 2016, when 49 people were killed at this gay nightclub, I noticed there was a real stunning lack of response from the U.S. bishops. And I thought, these poor people, they're kind of invisible to the church even when they're dead. I mean, what is it going to have to take?
It's horrible. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I did a Facebook video that, as they say, went viral when that was a good thing before COVID. And then that turned into a talk, which turned into a book called Building a Bridge. And that was I had gotten an award called the Bridge Building Award. And I thought that was a good metaphor, building a bridge between the institutional church and this community. And then that led to this ministry, which has been crazy controversial. I was stunned because I did this little book, and these books, it's kind of a resource book for parishes. And I thought, doesn't challenge any church teaching. It basically talks about treating them with love and listening to them. And that's it. People went nuts, and they're still going nuts. I mean, you Google my name online, and I was called last week Prophet of Satan by a number of publications. And my friends were all teasing me, like, are you going to change your Twitter handle now to Prophet of Satan? But so that's the ministry is basically outreach to the LGBTQ community, Catholic community mainly. We have a website now called Outreach, which is for news and resources. And those are the two times that I met with the Pope. It was about that. It was to discuss LGBTQ ministry. And he's been very supportive. And so it's been going on. I mean, people have done this for years and years, but for me, it's in like the last 5 or 6 years.
I mean, like, so like part of this, I mean, as a Christian,
mm-hmm.
And I'm relatively newer in the faith. I came to Christ back in 2008.
Welcome aboard.
Yeah, thanks. And prior to that, I mean, I was an atheist. I dabbled in Wiccan. I was all over the place. But if there's one sort of like prevailing mantra I kept hearing from Christians, it's that being gay is a sin and you're going to go to hell. And I'd be curious to kind of see, like, one, if that's true or if you believe it. I don't have any thoughts personally about it, but like, and then two, like, how do you talk to people, in the LGBT community, knowing that that's sort of the prevailing message from most believers in the country?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not going to challenge any church teaching here, but so what I say, you might be surprised at how open it is. Simply being gay, simply being LGBTQ is not a sin, right? I mean, people are born that way. And there's nowhere even in the catechism that talks about that. Now, the church is against, for a number of reasons, same-sex marriage and those kinds of things. But I think, what we have to look at first is, how these people are beloved children of God. The other thing I like to say is this, look, and you probably have this in your denominations, there are all sorts of different kinds of sins and ways that people aren't following what the church teaches exactly. In the Catholic Church, birth control is a sin, right? It's up there with, it's up there as a sin. And yet 80% of married couples use birth control. right? So they've made in their consciences, they've made a decision that this is, they understand Jesus, they understand the Gospels, they understand church teaching, they also understand their conscience. No one says, look at all those married couples in your church. Why are they here? Or 60% of Catholic youth are sexually active, college kids. And, if I gave a talk at a college, no one says, why are you talking to all those sinners? But it is the LGBTQ people that are just labeled like this. And it's as if there's nothing else where people's lives don't fully conform to church teaching. What about people who are like mean or not forgiving or don't help the poor? So it is kind of a singling out. And to your point, Will, I think one of the reasons that people feel like that is because that's all they hear. That's all they hear. And, imagine if, to take a crazy example, imagine if every Sunday a Catholic priest would get up and rail against birth control and all you horrible people and all you terrible couples and you're blah, 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 and you're destroying life. And, eventually they'd say the Catholic Church doesn't like married people. And so that's kind of what's happening. It's just they're kind of driving them out. So anyway, I'm curious about your guys' experience. What do you think, Josh? I mean, you must have people who come to you and.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I have people that are very close to me, actually even family members that came out as homosexual and have now married their partner and, legally here. And I was, I struggled a lot with the legalization of same-sex marriage and all of that. I was very, at the time I was it was very hard for me. My views have evolved in the sense that I'm not nearly as gung-ho about it. And I still have basically the same views as I did in terms of like what the institution of marriage and what it's, what the scriptures say about it. But I'm not nearly as dogmatic and really as judgmental. And that's the biggest thing is the judgmentalism. And I see my own sin and I see myself as a recipient of God's mercy and what's different for them. And so that's kind of how I do it. And I was wondering and I know I see that you want to respond. I want to give you a chance to do that.
No, it's okay. I'm listening to you. I'm curious.
Yeah, but I'm one thing that I'm interested to hear, if you can do it, what's the logic in the Catholic Church behind hey, same-sex marriage, we're against it, right? Or even the admission, okay, these people have been born with this. What I don't know, what do they call it? They
call it an orientation.
An orientation.
Yeah.
So is it an orientation towards sin? How does the Catholic Church in their logic bring about hey, this is where our position is?
Yeah, well, actually, that's easy to talk about because it's pretty clear. So the Catholic Church teaches that people have certain ends, ENDS, right? This is a lot from natural law, and the end, the goal, in a sense, of sexuality is procreation, is marriage, right? And men and women have this goal to be together, and that's how people are ordered. Okay, so we're ordered toward that. So the church teaching, the catechism teaches that homosexuality is what they call a disorder because it's ordered toward something else. And so the person is not sinful just in himself or herself.
Right.
But that inclination, because it's ordered that way, is not ordered in the way that the church sees marriage. Okay. Now, the difficulty with that a lot of critics have is, look, when we were understanding this, a lot of this comes from Thomas Aquinas and natural law in the 13th century, 13th century, I think. And we understood human sexuality differently. A lot of LGBT people actually argue, look, actually God has made us in the right way. We're not faulty. We're not disordered. And what we're ordered toward is, love and companionship and being together. And so the church needs to, say these people, change their teaching. Now, I always ask people to consider this, and this is an open question. I had a friend whose name was Carlos, and he in our church was, this may be inside Catholic talk, a Eucharistic minister, meaning he gave out communion to people, a spiritual director like your friend at Faulkner, a hospital chaplain, and what else? And a lector. He read. I mean, you can't get more. Like, he was a pillar of the church.
Right.
He was
right.
also gay, and he was married for like 20 years, and he got cancer, and his husband, Jim, took care of him, took him to chemo and radiation and surgery, and you know what that's like, and really cared for him all the way until the end. And one of the questions I always ask people, and I tell the story a little longer, is that love? You know, and were their lives ordered in the right way? And I think it is incumbent upon churches to meditate on that. You know, what is God revealing to us? Is that love? Is it a holy love? Is it something that's self-giving, which is what Christ asks of us, right? It's a selfless love. And so I think the church does need to meditate on that. So I'm not challenging church teaching, but I do think that the church has to look at that and to say, what is God revealing to us in that kind of love?
It's like what I hear you saying is we need to not give up on doing the hard work of difficult thinking and contextualizing our theology to the realities of today, which makes us ask, okay, what things are essential and what things are we putting up that we're giving even more weight than, say, any
love,
like that it's worth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then also when we look at the scriptural bases for these things, you know, one of the things I always like to challenge people with is this. People say, well, you know, Leviticus says it's an abomination. Absolutely. St. Paul says it's this. Absolutely. Leviticus also says we should stone people who take the name of the Lord in vain. And I say to people, do you think we should do that? And they say, no, of course not. You say, why not? Well, we think of these things differently in different contexts. And I say, well, suddenly when it comes to homosexuality, we become like literalists when we're not doing that with the rest of Leviticus. You know, I mean,
we're not being consistent.
No, we're not. I mean, and I say to people, do you think women should be stoned for committing adultery? No, of course not. Well, why not? It's in Leviticus. Well, that's different. Well, how is it different? Well, we understand it differently. And yet I think sometimes religion, and particularly those passages, become a little bit of not always, a little bit of a camouflage for basically just homophobia. You know what I mean? Like we're going to take that literally because we just don't like gay people. Whereas we can forgive people who take the name of the Lord in vain and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So,
all sorts of other stuff.
But to your point, I love that, what you just said, the hard work of thinking and looking at experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super cool. I'm really glad that you explained it that way, because we did a whole series last year during Pride Month, and we had some voices on the program that I'm fairly confident people have never heard from before. So we had a doctor who provides gender affirming care, just to kind of, and we asked our audience for questions. so
I'm sure you got a lot.
Yeah, we did. We wasn't able to get through all of them, but then we had a trans bishop, Megan Rohr, who is just phenomenal. I mean, if you're not sure who they are, it's worth Googling. But their heart was just in the right place. I mean, you know, and you hear from them all the discrimination, all the derogatory.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Comments, yeah. and then they said it's mainly from church people.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, oh gosh, like that sucks. That really sucks.
The number one reason why youth are homeless is because they're LGBTQ and they've been rejected by their families for quote unquote religious reasons.
Wow.
It is shocking. And it is. So I think, you know, there are so many things that we need to look at in terms of the LGBTQ person. You know, one of them is just their safety and how they're treated. And they really are like demonized. I don't know a whole lot about transgender people. I'm learning, but boy, these people are treated like devils.
Yeah.
And, you know, you see words like satanic and demonic, and a lot of them are just like, I just want to live my life and be who I am, you know, like, and maybe can I come to church once in a while? So, yeah. So anyway, so what I'm trying to do is stand with people who I feel have been kind of marginalized, and really lift up the Christian tradition, which is Jesus going out to those on the margins, you know, even people that, like, they were like, we don't want you to talk to them.
So how, this just comes up to me because I think it's beautiful. Like, so Jesus, obviously, when he came, he spent time with people that the religious elite of the day did not.
Absolutely.
Love.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the kind of people that would make him ceremonially unclean, the kind of people that would, which essentially made him morally suspect, right? In that culture. It's not like, and certainly not Messiah material. No Messiah material would be hanging out with these people.
Exactly.
And I guess my question, like, Jesus obviously found some way to remain holy and be with really unholy people. Mm-hmm. And and I'm not saying that any of us, right, have the holiness or some claim to godliness that the Son of God did. But my question is that, like, how do you manage the tension of, on the one side, the clear teaching of the church, and maybe even understanding what the church is saying and even agreeing or whatever it is? You understand the logic, you understand what it's saying, you understand the ins and outs of the theological, details that go into all this. How do you manage the tension of understanding all that and yet being an advocate for this group? And I think it's a great thing, by the way. Yeah. I'm just wondering that there's obviously a tension there, and if there isn't a tension, then something's going on.
I think one of the great understanding. Yeah, no, not at all. That's a great question. One of the analogies I like to use again, which is less fraught, is if you're a college campus minister, right, and 60% of your kids are having sex, are you with them? And most would say, of course. Yeah, I mean, they're not perfect. They're struggling. Yes, I love them. So there's not as much tension there. I think the reason we see so much tension with the LGBT stuff is because they are constantly, and I'm not saying you're doing this, they're constantly being lifted up as the sinner, the only people who are not following church teaching. And, frankly, I meet so many of them who are just good, like my friend Carlos that I was talking about. Like, I think that's love. And I think when, he and Jim were together and Jim was pouring himself out, I said Carlos's funeral mass, the church was packed. And so I think we have to recognize the love there. And I think that's what Jesus did. And, the thing is this, if the Gospels tell us anything, it's that everyone is called to conversion of a certain kind, and what does Jesus do? Jesus goes out to the people who, as you say, people don't think are deserving. Right. I mean, the Roman centurion, the woman at the well, one of my favorite stories is Zacchaeus. Now, I want to spend a second on that. So Zacchaeus in the Gospel of Luke, as you both know, is the tax collector in Jericho. And of course, he would have been seen as the chief sinner. And Jesus reaches out to him. He climbs a tree as he's coming through Jericho. And one of my favorite lines, I think, in the entire New Testament is when Jesus reaches out to this man, and I'm not comparing LGBT people to Zacchaeus because he's a sinner, but because he's on the outs. It says, all who saw this began to grumble. And, Jesus is like, I always laugh because this is Jesus doing it. And one of my New Testament professors, I was doing this and looking at it in the Greek, and the Greek is panta for all. And he said that would have included the disciples. So people don't like it when you're trying to be merciful to someone who's on the margins. It happened in Jesus' time and it happens in our time. And he just stands there and still does it. So I think that's where we're called to be, because the problem is people think the people who are in the crowd think I'm holy and perfect and they're sinful, when in fact we're all sinful in different ways.
Yeah, that's so true. I want to ask you another question. Well, not even in the same vein, but still dealing with sexuality. So the Catholic Church has had some issues with like sexual abuse. And
that's an understatement. Yes.
Yeah. And to whatever degree you can talk about, what the actual, extent or scope of the abuse is,
sure,
what the Catholic Church is doing about it. And maybe even like why, like, is it like, why is it so widespread? specific?
Oh yeah, I mean, it is. First of all, it's a crime. It's an abomination. I think one of the first things to know is that any priest who is credibly accused, is removed. I think the other thing to remember that it is not, something that has to do with celibacy or Catholicism. We see it everywhere, right? We see it mostly in families. I think something like 4% of priests worldwide have been credibly accused.
Wow.
It's very high, and yet, by the same token, it's about the same in the general public, and
Right.
fathers, families, football coaches. I mean, all sorts of things that you're seeing today,
Right.
more and more. I think there's a lot of reasons for it. First of all, some people have that unfortunate predilection, right? So it seems like that's their attraction, right? Second of
Right.
all, I think when these things were raised in the church, I think initially people just couldn't believe it. Like I'm talking about in the 50s and 60s, like that, this is so horrifying. Then what happens is then they cover it up because this would, quote unquote, as we know this is a Christian thing, cause scandal, give scandal to people. And then also I think a lot of the bishops just didn't know what to do with it. One of the things I've talked to bishops about has said, like in the 60s and 70s, a lot of psychologists thought this was, and you'll understand this, a moral problem, meaning you're doing something bad, you should stop, versus like a psychological problem. So it just kept going on, and it's horrible. I have to say, I lived with two guys who were removed from ministry. They both died, and it's horrible. It's horrible what they do to people. It's a crime, and they should look, if it's they should be in jail. But I do think the Catholic Church has made great strides. We've tried to be kind of a leader in this. People are removed immediately, even the slightest hint of anything. And we go through all sorts of training about how to recognize things, and I'll say it, turning people in, and we should, and we're really getting. It's a shame. I was just thinking about this morning, actually, because the stereotype of the Catholic priest now is like the abuser of kids, which to me is just, I have to say, it's terrible. It's like repulsive to me. I think some people are just kind of built that way, unfortunately. And it's just, it's horrible. So it's really been, that to me is still the greatest crisis facing the church. Even though we've addressed it, there are still places where it still needs to be rooted out, And then the question of, paying people and, legitimate payouts, which have really destroyed certain parts of the church. I mean, again, we were right. We have to pay these people, but, parishes have closed and dioceses have closed schools. And so, and, my religious order has not been immune. We've had guys who I've known, and it's just, and so there are many reasons for it.
Yeah. I should probably point out, that when you mentioned, the church was a little averse to, recognizing it, because it would be a scandal, that you did air quotes, and for our listeners.
What I meant was, the Christian, right, the Christian way of looking at it would, and this is the thought, we should not air this because it would make people upset and make them think less of the church. It would cause them, it would give them scandal, which is a kind of Christian thing. But then, of course, the bigger scandal was, covering it up. It's just, I could talk to you about this for a couple hours. There's so many different reasons. I do want to say one thing early on, and I've talked to bishops, first of all, what bishop is going to say, I want someone in a parish who's abusing kids. Okay. So that's, they obviously are not in favor of that. But what happens is these things were presented to them, and I think they were so horrified and confused, and psychologists would say, well, look, this guy just needs some treatment and he'll be fine, and then they put them back in the ministry. And what we know now is that these guys continue to abuse. But also by the same token, after the guy does it several times, the bishop should have just said, look, this is enough. You know what I'm saying? Like you might be able to, and I don't want to excuse any of the abuse. What I'm saying is ignorance of the psychology of sex abuse only goes so far. So
that makes a lot of sense, and I agree
and I'm not
with
excusing any of this, but these are all crimes. These people should be in jail.
Sure, yeah,
and a lot of them are.
I was thinking as you were talking, you have this, this example of, and these events that happened with these priests, displayed something that clearly the church would have seen and rightly seen as as a significant disorder of their conscience.
Yes.
Right. And of their heart and mind. And my question as you're coming to this, right. And again, this just to make sure that I'm very clear.
Sure.
I am not saying that same-sex attraction is the same.
Right.
As attraction to, as pedophilia, right? As attraction to a child or, teenager or whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm.
My question as you're coming to it, like, and particularly, and I don't know if this is going to make total sense, but particularly, how do you, again, like even walking me through the hermeneutics of how you move from what the scripture says to how you treat and help care for people that have any of these kinds of, and any kind of disorder.
I understand
thing,
what
whether
you're saying.
It's
so let's say, right, what do we do with someone who is, right, unfortunately attracted to kids, right? Okay. Now, part of it is, there are certain things that are just, I think we can all agree, out of bounds, right? And one of the things that we should do, and that the church is now doing, is that you don't accept these people into seminary, right? And I do think that there is and I know you're not saying this, there is an enormous difference between two consenting adults and what is essentially, raping a child. And I don't even have to say essentially.
Yes,
and so
it is.
So I think the easiest way to understand that is to not have these people in any sort of positions where they can be have access to children. And so we do a lot of psychological testing now, which is very helpful. I do want to say one thing, because I think I want to say one thing, and I hope you please keep this in the program. A lot of times when I'm explaining things like the reasons, people think that I'm giving excuses, right? You're excusing it. But what I'm trying to say is how this crisis came about. So I want to say really clearly, these things are crimes, right? Not just sins, and really an abomination. And and also, look, there are civic and civil things. And when these people, these priests, or, as we could go through the list of the Boy Scouts, Joe Paterno. I mean, it's not just the Catholic Church, right? When these people do these things, they should be in jail because society has decided that this is, and it's an abomination. It kills me. But, look, I'll just say as a Catholic priest, I mean, I have two nephews and I love being, little kids are so much fun. I am extremely, I don't touch any child now, not even like pat them on the head anymore, which I think is appropriate, but because I know how people are looking at me, So that
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean,
and in some ways that's sad because there's appropriate touch and there's appropriate, affection that people like.
Well, kids come running up to you and throw their arms around you, whatever.
Of course they do.
Yeah, and it's funny. I always say to people, Josh, it is sad right now, but it's necessary for the church to regain some sort of. And I also think, people need to know that these priests are out of ministry. They're out. I mean, you do anything and you're out, and you should be.
And and the Netflix documentaries make it look like they're all still in there, but of course that's not the case.
No, and then thank God, and it took us long enough to get rid of them.
Yeah, so Jim, I meant to ask you this kind of at the top of the interview, but I'm curious about some Catholic type traditions or texts that I've heard personally about, but I don't really quite know like what they are. So just a few, one, like the Catechism, and like the Rosary and like Hail Marys.
Sure.
Can you kind of break?
This is a lot nicer topic than talking about sex. So fire away. The Catechism is basically a compendium of Catholic teaching over the centuries. It's a book that basically summarizes Catholic teaching on basically everything. It's a 900,000 page book. And unfortunately, some people, I mean, it's very important, but unfortunately, some people almost kind of exalt it over the Bible, which it is not. It's a summary. It's a summary of teaching. A rosary is a series of beads that basically you use to remind you to pray certain prayers, like the Hail Mary, which is a prayer in honor of Mary, who, I mean, I'm sure you know Mary. And it's the angel Gabriel's words to Mary, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you, from Luke. And then the rest of it is, taken from another part of the Bible. It's just a prayer like the Our Father. It helps people, prayer beads, basically. Any other, these questions are easy to answer. Any other Catholic trivia you want to know about?
Yeah. Well, so like are there like a certain number of beads that represent, I don't know how many times you have to say it.
Yeah. So so there are, I feel like I should show you, but I have about 1 million of them behind me. There's 5 sets of 10, basically. And then between you say the Our Father. It's basically a way to help people pray. That's essentially what it is. It's nothing, it's not magic or anything. And another thing to be important, we do not worship Mary. She's not God. We venerate her as we respect her. And also this is something a lot of non-Catholics don't understand. We ask for her prayers. That's what we're doing. We're not praying to her, asking her to do something. So I always say to people who have a hard time understanding it this: would you ever ask for Josh's prayers? Yes, you would. Of course you would. Can you pray for me? I'm going through it. Why wouldn't you ask for someone's prayers that were in heaven? So why wouldn't you ask for Mary's prayers? So that's what we're doing. We're praying. We're asking for her prayers. We call that intercession. And St. Paul talks about that. We have so great a cloud of witnesses, and they help us with their prayers and blah, blah, blah. So yeah. These kinds of questions I enjoy much more.
These are the easy questions.
Oh, these are the easy questions. Yeah.
Unfortunately, sometimes the easy ones aren't the most controversial, and the ones that get the most likes. And
always the easy ones are not controversial. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's so good. So, I mean, I guess for me, what do you feel like your engagement with the LGBTQ community, how do you feel like that shaped your sense of God's grace?
What a great question. I never get asked questions like that. That God reveals God's self through very unexpected people. And look, Here's the thing. We see that constantly in the scriptures. I mean, the story of David, who, him? I got another one out in the field, right? Here I am, Lord, right? Who, him? And I think my favorite, and Mary, Mary's a 14, 15-year-old girl in Nazareth, which was 200 or 400 people, and then, of course, the big one, of course, is Jesus. People, the gospel reading just the other day, one of my favorites. Is this not the carpenter? That's one of my favorite lines.
Yes.
What, him? So that guy, wait, aren't his, I just love that. It's so real. Wait, don't we know his mother and his brothers? And isn't Joseph, blah, blah, blah. So the unexpected people are really are the carriers of God's grace for us. And I think it's especially in them that we find God's grace. The other one I like to talk about is very briefly, the Good Samaritan. So we always say, well, we need to be a Good Samaritan. But the salvation of the beaten man by the side of the road, right, depends on the one whom he considers to be an other, different. The Samaritan, I don't want him. His salvation depends on that person. So how does our salvation depend on the people that we consider to be other or different?
Wow, man, that's a profound question. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw you another question, dude.
Feel free.
Is probably the most important one.
I like being called dude, by the way. I never get called dude.
Father dude.
Father dude. People are usually either they call me prophet of Satan or it's like, oh, Father. Father.
So who are you gonna vote for or root for? Who are you gonna root for in the Super Bowl?
Now, that is the easiest question you have asked me because I was born in Philadelphia.
Well, there you go.
So
dude.
all I have to say is fly, Eagles, fly. That is the easiest and perhaps the most important question that you asked me.
I'm a Commanders fan, unfortunately, and so I cannot root for the Eagles in the Super Bowl. Well, so I guess I'm going to be going KC.
Did you hear what happened in New York with the Empire State Building?
No.
This is so funny. So the Empire State Building, as you know, like every day, it lights up for something different. It's Diwali, it's something day, and it's different colors, you know, and it's almost, and people don't even pay attention. A lot of times people don't even know, like, why is it yellow today or whatever. Right. So when the Eagles won, now you know how much the Giants don't like the Eagles and vice versa. When the Eagles won, the Empire State Building was in green and white, and people went insane. And I even said on social media, look, I'm a huge Eagles fan, but this would be, as a New Yorker, you know, I said, if this happened in Philadelphia, they would burn the building down. They would come and they would burn it down. But I wear my Eagles hat all over town. And I was in the gym the other day. So funny. There's this guy who's behind the desk, and I walk in with this like Eagles like winter hat on. And before the guy even said good morning, he just looked at me and goes, "You're gonna lose." It's so funny. So yeah, fly Eagles fly. Dude. All right, my friend.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you,
Father, friend,
Jim, dude.
I really appreciate it, dude. Father,
dude. It is my pleasure. Great conversation, and just keep me in your prayers.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've really enjoyed having you on here, and to everyone listening and watching the blank screen, Father Martin is a handsome dude, awesome, great guy. And we're just so appreciative that you would give us your time here, Father. Thank you. And for everyone else, we'll see you next week. We're super excited about the lineup we have coming. So please stay tuned. I think you're gonna love it. So thank you guys, and have a great week.
All right.
We'll see you next time. God bless.
Yeah, thanks. God bless.